Welcome back to the Sunny Talk Spurs YouTube channel. And at the moment, I'll tell you, it is really a struggle to do videos about Tottenham because there's not a lot of good things to say about them. So today I've invited Alice Talks Football on because she can take some of the brunt of it and talk about Tottenham, even though it's not her first team. But we obviously know ahead of the weekend, Tottenham are facing Manchester United in the Premier League. And it does feel again like El Sacco from a couple of years ago when, Nuno did that fateful substitution and put the nail in his coffin as Tottenham manager. But Alice, how are you doing? And I mean, it must be such a poor state for both our clubs at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the football we're playing at Man United fans is so boring. It's just like put me to sleep. But the one thing about Man United is we may be crap, but even when we're crap, we can still win a trophy. And we're in the cup competition, win the FA Cup, Europa League, who knows? So maybe the season can be saved.
That's the bit that does me in. It was like when Arsenal were bad in their banter era under Wenger, they still scooped like 2 or 3 FA Cups. Tottenham can't do that. We're allergic to trophies. But another reason why I got you on as well, because a lot of people have told me, Amorim hasn't had that new manager bounce. So that's what could sort of happen with Ange Postecoglou if we were to part ways with him. So my first question would be, in regard to what you've experienced this season as well, and looking at Tottenham, what are you making of this whole Tottenham situation? There's a lot to blame. You can blame Ange, you can blame the players, you can blame Levy. Where is your head with it at the moment?
I think like there's a bit of responsibility everywhere. I think, players like Son could step up more this season. And I think some of the bigger players haven't performed, and it's the youngsters that seem to be putting the most fight in. I think Ange is definitely getting things wrong. But the thing with Ange is sometimes he can't win. People are saying, oh, he needs to change his tactics because we all could see goals, we bottle leads. And then he changes his tactics and he gets done for being too defensive. But he's definitely getting tactical approaches wrong. And I even think substitutions wrong. Like, I didn't see much of the Villa game because I was in and out. But like from what I saw, like Mikey Moore looked brighter than Son. But Son would always stay on the pitch, which I get why managers do that. But I think sometimes if it's not working for you, why don't you, keep the players on that are working? And I think he's getting things wrong and bigger calls. But I think the ultimate blame is obviously going to be above Ange because how many managers have you been through? How many, you've not won anything in like what's this? Was it 2003 was it or 2007?
2008 was our last
2007,
trophy.
2008. I mean, that's a long time. And, the consistency is not the players, not the manager, but Daniel Levy, those at the top of the club. And I think most of the blame is at those at the top. But I think, the players, the manager can be getting things better. You've not had luck with injuries. And it's one of those with Ange Postecoglou where he's definitely underperforming. Like, there's no doubt about it. But he's also had a gazillion injuries. Eddie Howe was in a similar situation last year, but it wasn't quite as bad as this. And you look at Newcastle now with the players staying fit, and they didn't even have a transfer window, didn't bring anyone in the summer. And I think when everyone was fit at the beginning of the season, Tottenham played some quite good football. I think you had a run where you won like 9 out of 11 games or something like that earlier in the season. And there was something there. And you can see with Ange, well, there was something to build upon, but has it been too bad for too long to then go, ooh? And I think that's the big question. Now, my only theory as a United fan is if you sack Ange now, I don't know who comes in and who makes it better. You might decide in the summer this wasn't good enough for Ange, he's got to go, and that can be debatable. But I think right now you've got bigger problems than the manager, and I wouldn't look to sack him now. But I can understand Tottenham's fans' frustration because to go out of 2 cup competitions in a week and the way you went out versus Liverpool, 4-0, well, it was embarrassing from Tottenham.
That's what I mean. And the idea where my issues come from is if we were going to back him and give him these cup games, both the Villa in the FA Cup and Liverpool in the League Cup, Levy knew this for a while, hence why he kept him on after the likes of the Ipswich result, the Leicester result, the Everton result at Goodison Park. Then why didn't we sort our, put our house in order, get the transfer window stuff done early, and then just the injuries and all that. And that's where my next question is going to come from. When it comes to injuries, obviously we've got like 11 or so players out. A few of them coming back very, very soon. And Ange Postecoglou, if you've seen it in his post-match press conference, basically said for the last 2.5 months, he's been playing the same team. Archie Gray's played so many minutes, Bergvall, etc., etc. But is Ange Postecoglou really to blame for the injuries? Because I know you referenced like Newcastle and Eddie Howe and all that, and some of their players have had injury issues. Like Isak is very injury prone, but the style of play that Tottenham, very end to end, pressing galore. I think I don't know if you've seen this graph as well. I did it in my last video. We are the highest intensity team, both in and out of possession. Like there's a graph and we're like so bolt in the top right.
Yeah, I
It's
saw that.
ridiculous. So is that an Ange issue? Because surely there's games where you've got to maybe conserve that energy. Not so much, low block and defensive, but at the moment, I like and I know I'm waffling on here a little bit, but Ange ball is meant to be this dynamic attack, amazing pressing. But it looks at the moment we're just pressing, stupidly and getting overrun in midfield, leaving gaps like we did against Villa, and they can just run through the middle. So that's quite a long question. But yeah, in regard to injuries, what do you make of that?
It's difficult because I think obviously the way you play, I saw the graph. Yeah, you're going to get more injuries with the way you play. But I always say the thing is with injuries is when one player gets injured in a position and then you've only got one other option, that other option has to play every game. So then you can't rest and rotate. And it's like when you get 2 or 3 injuries, you can get 4, 5, 6 because of that and the lack of rotation. And I think his play has maybe resulted in more injury-prone players struggling to stay fit. I do think you just have injury-prone players as well, and I think it's harder to stay fit. But the problem is, if someone gets injured, like we had it with Malacia. Malacia was injured for 18 months, so when Luke Shaw was back, he had to play. And the problem with that was we couldn't rest Luke Shaw, so then he would get injured again, and he would get injured again because you almost all right when as soon as you're like Mickey Van de Ven, as soon as he's fit, he goes back in, and then he gets injured again. It's like because you almost can't afford to wait those extra 2-3 weeks or mold him here or mold him there. And I think there's elements of it on Ange. I think elements of it is being unlucky. I think there's so many factors that come into play, but I think when you get 1 or 2 injuries, the situation becomes worse because I think Kulusevski needs a rest. This guy is constantly running, but you can't rest him at the moment. And maybe if Maddison was fit and you were going to play Kulusevski in the middle, you could put him on the bench, play Maddison for a game. I think that's the problem, but it's very mixed in terms of who to blame. I think Ange can't be blamed now for lack of rotation because there's not many rotation options for any positions. You've got no depth. You look at your bench, but maybe earlier on he could have been like, oh, do I need to be that intense versus Southampton, for example?
And the only defence I'd say for maybe the Ange out brigade would be, we're saying the injuries and it is an excuse and it is a reason. I will say, not being able to rotate in competitions is vital. But when you look at certain games this season and even last, Leicester away at the beginning of the season, Ipswich at home, Fulham last year where we got beaten 3-0. We had our full strength team out. And don't get me wrong, when you lose Van der Ven and Romero and, Poro's playing every game and stuff like that, that is a stick to hit Ange with because, you've gone to Fulham who, they can pull a result out of the hat, but on paper, Tottenham should probably be beating them. And same with definitely with Ipswich and teams like that. So that is where I guess the argument comes from. And also, Ange sort of hasn't helped himself in regard to not putting Jed Spence in the Europa League squad because of a mix-up over, homegrown and home-trained quotas, but also not rotating him in the Premier League. And look how good Jed Spence is now. He's one of our best players. But, we ran Udogie into the ground. Pedro Porro's played the max amount of minutes. So there are those moments where, you can see it both ways. Like we were saying before the call, there are moments where you can praise Ange for tactically changing it. West Ham, for example, because, he saw that the midfield was getting overrun and he made a sub at halftime and it changed the game. Fair enough. But in the most recent games, like going to Anfield and trying to play defensive when we haven't got the capacity to, it's just not going to happen. So so going back to my first point, when it has been Tottenham's best team, which we saw actually towards the end of last season when we went on that really horrid run. I think we lost to Arsenal, Chelsea in consecutive weeks, City. Like, what does that give you any hope that Tottenham could turn it around and maybe get back to that first run after the 10 games, or is it just doomed?
Well, I thought you started this season all right. You were a bit hit and miss because you obviously dropped points. I think it was Leicester the first game of the season, but you had a really good first half, and then it was like, how did you drop points in that game? But you had like a decent run. I think it might have been maybe September, October, where you did win 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 11 or something like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
And there was elements of like, okay, Tottenham scoring goals, they're actually playing quite good football, your underlying numbers were good. And then it always seems to happen, Van der Ven gets injured, and then everybody else gets injured, and then the wheels fall off. And it seems to always be triggered by maybe Van der Ven's injury, because he seems to be such an important player. And it's difficult because Ange needs to be doing better. Tottenham Hotspur can't be, what's it, 14th in the league, losing 4-0 to Liverpool with a 1-0 lead. I look at the starting 11, I look at the bench, and I'm going to be honest, it's not great starting 11. It's not a great bench. There's not a whole lot of options there for Ange, and there is sympathy there with him. But I also just think it needs to be better than this. It's not good enough. And I think the way I look at it is, I don't think sacking Ange solves Tottenham's problems right now, because I think another manager comes in, he has the same squad, the players ultimately aren't good enough, and it's not going to get miles better. Look at Ten Hag and Amorim. Like, I think we're playing worse football under Amorim than we were under Ten Hag, but I'm also aware that this isn't Amorim's squad, and he plays with wing backs, and we don't have wing backs. And I'll criticise Amorim on that, but I think Amorim will get us playing better football in the long run. The way I see it with Tottenham is, I don't think a new manager comes in, and it feels like Tottenham can't be much worse, but with that squad and these current players available, I don't think a new manager comes in and Tottenham get miraculously better. It's one of those where I think you keep Ange to the end of the season, but at the end of the season, you have a conversation. You say, right, we could get Ange, some left centre back depth, left back depth, another winger that's actually proven, maybe a DM in there as well, because you've been linked to that Cardozo guy, and we can see what happens. Or they go, Iriola's open to the Tottenham job. I don't know if he is, but if someone like Iriola, who is a proven Premier League manager, open Tottenham job, they might say, you know what, let's not spend in the summer. Let's get Iriola in and then spend in the summer. Do you know? I think for me, the way I look at it is, I don't think sacking Ange solves the problems, because it goes beyond him. But I can understand if Tottenham in the summer want to make that call. But I think it would depend who's available, because I still think there's a project there at Tottenham, and mine might be crazy. And obviously, I'm a United fan, so I don't get that emotional attachment to Tottenham that Tottenham fans might get and be reaction in a moment. But Archie Gray, Bergvall, Mikey Moore, you got Vuskovic to come in, Sar's really young, Van der Ven's still quite young. There's a project there. There's young players, and they're in 3, 4, 5 years time, they're going to be so much better than they are now. A lot of those young players, Solanke's a top player, Kulusevski's a top player. There's a project there at Tottenham, and if everybody stays fit and they develop and they get this potential, there is a project. But I think you have to evaluate where you are in the summer.
Yeah, I guess some would argue it's like, to move him on maybe would be like what people have said about Southgate. Like, you've got the best team you've ever seen. Not saying Tottenham are, but England, well, player-wise, were and are. You've got so many young players, and if they're not developing under Ange, or not many players have improved. Maybe Kulusevski. So, but we haven't really had the consistent team all the time. So that is an issue. I mean, the way I see it now is, and people have criticised me in my comment section saying I've changed, but I think my outlook would be, see what happens until the end of the season, and if nothing drastically changes, then maybe look at other options. But even, that's another issue I've noticed as well. Just because you go and pluck a Thomas Frank, a Marco Silva, and Iriola, and dump them in Tottenham, first of all, they might say no, because some of those teams could be in Europe next year and want to give a project. Or two, they'll get better offers. Or actually, three, they won't get back like the other managers have at Tottenham anyway. So why do they want to work under Levy? That's what I see.
Like United, you're a curse for managers. Nuno goes to Tottenham. Look at him at Forest now, and it's like, good managers come to United, it doesn't work. Good managers come to Tottenham, it doesn't work. And again, I think you're similar to us, where the problems are those above the managers at the end of the day. And until there's real changes there, it's going to be very difficult for any manager to succeed at Tottenham.
And sadly, unless we protest, we chant, that's all well and good. But like, Levy's upped his ownership in the club. Like, him and Enoch, Joe Lewis have upped their percentage. So that's probably not going to happen anytime soon, which is a worrying case. But and then this is the thing with, like, I was talking to a friend before and saying, like, with Ange Ball, you mentioned some of those games earlier in the season where we narrowly lost to Newcastle, drew with Leicester. There were good signs there, and we could have won those games, could have scored a lot more. But the problem is, it's not there now. Like, the football I'm watching now feels very Conte-esque, Mourinho-esque. But people will say about Mourinho and Conte, they didn't want to be there, but Ange you can tell he wants to be there. He's always taking the blame. So it's at the moment with Spurs, you're definitely caught between a rock and a hard place about, what's next, what can happen, what's going wrong. So, it is just one of those things. But yeah, you mentioned United there, so we'll talk about them before we preview the game, which it seems like is going to be a mid-table clash. Who would have thought that? But what have you made of Ruben Amorim? Because he has been touted as, one of the good young managers coming into the game. His sporting team were incredible. But at the moment, and I've called United this a lot, I think it's square pegs in round holes. It's trying to play, centre backs in positions that they're not comfortable with, putting wingers in full back positions. So are you hopeful that Amorim, given time, given a bit of money, moving some other people out, he will be able to take United to the next level and back to where they think they should be?
United, it is very much short-term pain, long-term gain. I think that's the point Amorim's trying to make, because Ten Hag came into United, and in his first game, I think we lost 2-1 to Brighton, and then his second game we lost 4-0 to Brentford. And he was doing this 4-3-3, and it was trying to be like more attacking football. And then Ten Hag realised that wasn't working. He went to a 4-2-3-1, more defensive approach, and we came third, and we won the Carabao Cup in Ten Hag's first season. But then in his second season, he wanted to go back to the 4-3-3. And he tried to that in the second season, realised, well, this player can't do that, this player can't do that, because they'd learned how to play the 4-2-3-1, which was more similar to what Ollie did in his first season. Now, Ruben Amorim isn't doing what Ruud van Nistelrooy did, which is play a 4-2-3-1 because it suits the Man United squad, get a few results at the end of the season. Ruben Amorim is very much like, I'm going to do my sort of 3-5-2-1 system, and I'm going to stick with it to the end of the season, even though it doesn't get the best out of the players, because that way I'm going to learn who can play in my system. The players will learn my system, because if Ruben Amorim believes that if he does a 4-2-3-1 this season and we maybe finish 7th instead of looking on track to finish 13th, when he implements the 3 at the back system next season, we might fall to 13th. And he's saying, this is the sacrifice I'm going to make. It's learning the system. There's players like Diogo Dalot that were our best player last season, was really important at the start of the season, and was almost untouchable at United. We're like, he doesn't suit Amorim's system, and we've learned that this season. Actually, a player like Dalot, that's a good player in a back four, who'd get 30 million for, we may now have to sell in summer, which we'd have never considered had we been playing four at the back. And I think you learn things from that, but it is so bad, the football we're playing. I've actually read that I think we've won 6 out of our last 8 games somehow. I mean, obviously Maguire fluky offside goal versus Leicester. Southampton, and we were crap, and then Amad Diallo scored a 12-minute hat trick. The Fulham game was one of those boring games I've watched in my life, and a deflection goal wins it. And then Arsenal was a good game. Liverpool was a good game in the sense of, I think, off the ball we've improved a lot under Amorim in terms of structure, in terms of actually all of that. But on the ball, we're hopeless. We're hopeless going forward, and losing Rashford and not replacing him is a huge loss. Antony's not too much of a loss because he just wasn't really playing this season anyway. But there's no firepower in attack, and I feel like our attacking plays regressed, and I think that's because we've almost got an extra defender on the pitch under Amorim, because we don't have wing backs, we have full backs, and it's a bit like they're not doing anything. And I think I've been critical of Amorim, but I'm not Amorim out. I'm very much like, this is a long-term project. We've got to back the project. We've got to hope that Ineos get recruitment spot on in the summer. Like, recruitment is so key to this project, and I think that because of what sporting fans have said about this manager, even though it's a toxic United environment, I think that he can succeed with the right players, but it's going to take patience. But I've been critical of what I've said now, because he's got decisions wrong in games. He took Dorgu off last game when he was miles better than Dalot, and I'm thinking, well, what's that all about? And you've signed a left wing back, and then you're playing him right wing back and keeping Dalot left wing back, and it's then Dalot and Mazraoui, when they play wing back, it's just you're not going to score a goal because they're back four players. So I think he's getting things wrong, and I think the football we're playing is honestly some of the worst and most boring football. It's, Ten Hag needed to be sacked, but it's not better than Ten Hag ball. It's not at all. But I just got to hope for next season, really.
Yeah, I guess at least you're getting results, like playing bad, getting results, whereas we can't do. We play bad, we don't get results. But rounding up with a few more questions, then. First of all, little short and sharp one. Who do you reckon's in the bigger mess at the moment, Man United or Spurs?
Oh, maybe. The thing is, I think that if all your players are fit, you're in a better place than us. Because I think actually when I look at what you need in the summer, I think, okay, DM, although Gray could go in there, left centre back depth, left back depth, and you need probably a top winger. I think Tal will probably be back up to Solanke. I think you'll probably end up getting him. And I think that's 4 signings. And I think Cardozo's is one that would be very easy to do. And then the other 2 is depth, but you need them to push Van de Ven and you need them to push Udogie. Although Spence can play there, but I think he could push Porro. Whereas I look at United and I think, we're more likely to win a trophy than Tottenham. We're above Tottenham, but I feel like we've got a lot more to do than you. I look at it and I'm like, other than Amad Diallo, like, who is 100% safe at United? Højlund, who had 16 goals last season, is stinking it up. Zirkzee, Amorim said he doesn't see him as a 9. Garnacho could go, because he doesn't fully suit the system, but he's looked all right the last few games. There's talk of Ineos selling Mainoo. You've sort of got Gray and Bergvall, and your plan is to build around them. That Ineos are like, oh, we might sell Mainoo, we might sell Garnacho. So I think it feels like Tottenham are in a bigger mess now, but I actually think there's a bigger job to do at Man United, if that makes sense.
Garnacho to Tottenham, perhaps?
I think it works. I think he works under Ange Postecoglou, but I saw Tottenham fans being quite negative about that. But I think Garnacho, even though Rashford's a better player, I think Garnacho is more suited to Ange Postecoglou than Rashford because you were linked to both of them at one point.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of it. It's just, I mean, if we keep Ange as well, it's sometimes with him, he doesn't like players with a certain attitude. And, hence why maybe we didn't sign an Ivan Toney in the summer. But yeah, I like the idea of Garnacho. I think it's weird. I just feel like he's got all the potential there. He's been compared to Ronaldo, but where will he play next? That is the big question. But finally, before we preview the game, Matthijs Tel, obviously massive, big transfer saga linked with Arsenal, Chelsea, United, and eventually U-turned and went to Spurs. What do you make of him as a player? Do you think he will sign for Spurs on a permanent? Could he end up at United? And also, what have you made of Kevin Danso as well, Kinski, Tottenham's window? Was it good?
It's so early to judge because again, I didn't watch all the Villa game because I was out on Sunday, so I just saw bits and bobs of it. Um, I think on paper Danzo should be a good signing because he can play in a high line. I know it wasn't great at Southampton, but he can play in a high line. I remember I was talking about centre backs back in the summer that United could sign, and we were talking about Todibo for United, and I said, well, Danzo's got similarities to Todibo. This could be like a. I always saw him as a depth centre back at United. I said United needed 2 centre backs back in the summer. We need one that gets in that starting 11, and we need one for depth. And I think Danzo I think he's a better player than Dragusin and someone that would push Romero and Van de Ven a bit more than Dragusin. And I think it should be a good signing. I think obviously he's been thrown into 2 difficult games. I think too early to judge him right now. I think Tel will be a good signing. But the thing with Tel was he's someone that's for the future. And I was like, oh, but Tottenham kind of need someone that's a bit more ready now. So if you're just bringing in a raw player on loan, I think it's good for another body in attack because Richarlison can't stay fit. And, Solanke, when he's back, he runs his legs off. So you can rotate him in Solanke. You can even play him out wide. I think profile-wise, Tel's a good player to have. But it surely, I think the plan is to have him, see if he does well, and then get him on a permanent for the future because I think, again, he's a future player. But I like Tel. Again, I watched a bit more of him last season when Tuchel was in charge because they played Man United in the Champions League, and he was scoring quite a few goals last season. I watched a bit more of Bayern under Thomas Tuchel because obviously the Tuchel Man United links as well. And I liked him, and he reminds me a little bit. I think he'll be eventually a striker, but he reminds me a little bit of Gakpo, but Gakpo's better at left wing, but I think Tel will become better at striker because he's got that goal-scoring instinct in him. And I think if Tottenham get the ball in the right area, like you saw with the goal versus Villa, he's got that in him. He's got that pace, he's got that power, he's got the run. I think he's a player that, I know he hadn't scored a goal this season at Bayern, but he'll be one of those players where they might not be crazy involved in a game, but they can win a game. I feel like that's the kind of player he will be. And I think he showed a little bit of that versus Villa with the chance that he got, but I liked how.
Yeah, I think he's got the potential. I'd like us to keep him if possible. Again, maybe an Ange problem. Why did he play him on the wing? Maybe Son on the wing, him down the middle would have made more sense because the cross from Kulusevski at the finish, it was quite instinctive. And, we haven't had a player like you just described there since Harry Kane who can just, some games, I don't want to say go missing, but, nothing happens and he pops up with 70th minute or something like that. But, yeah, finally then, the game, the all-important clash. How do you see it going? What do you think is going to happen? And what's your score prediction? Because I'll be honest, we've had an all right record against you. Obviously, we beat you in the reverse fixture earlier in the season in the Premier League. We beat you in the League Cup. But I just am never hopeful for United. I just always think like, lads, it's Tottenham. So, yeah, what do you reckon?
Do you know what? This is like for me the hardest fixture to predict right now because I think Tottenham and Man United are like the most unpredictable sides in the league. The games you think they might win, like Leicester and Ipswich, for you lose. And then the games you think, oh, they'll lose that. You know, you beat Liverpool in the first leg, you beat Manchester City 4-0. You know, it's like, I feel like, apart with the exception, obviously, what happened recently, I feel like you've showed up in bigger games like City United. We showed up in the Arsenal game and the Liverpool game, but then we'll play a Southampton and we'll be shy, or we'll play a Leicester or we'll be shy or barely beat them. So it's really hard to predict because I think United have the edge right now, I think, over Tottenham, because again, you've got a bit more injuries than us. And I feel like we are more stable in the sense of we don't look bad, we just don't look good, if that makes sense. It's like we lost to Brighton, but like it's more that we never looked like scoring. But like I don't think we were outplayed by Brighton. It was just like we don't look like scoring, we don't look like doing anything. And Tottenham are the kings of gifting the opponent a goal. So that's what I think we're going to hope. What I hope happens. But again, I think you go back. Was it the Carabao Cup game? I think it could be messy. I think 3-3. It could be 0-0. It could be 3-3. But I think a draw is probably the most likely outcome because we're very similar
Yeah.
ways.
I mean, you might as well just roll a dice and see what numbers it chucks up, and that's probably your scoreline. Yeah, I see it being the same. Like, I feel like I said to someone the other day, it's the one game where both teams could lose. I don't know what that means, but it sounds poetic. So I think it could be a draw. I think it could just be a 1-1 or something, like, especially because it's the 4:30 Sky Sports Super Sunday game. Usually boring. But then Tottenham come into town and will make it entertaining. But yeah, thank you very much, Alice, for jumping on. Obviously, I love getting you on the channel to talk about Tottenham, United, all that sort of good stuff. But before you go, do you want to just plug your many channels and social media outlets?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on, guys. Make sure you subscribe to Sonny if you're not already. But yeah, if you want Man United content, Alice Talks Football on YouTube. If you want content that talks about sort of all the big six clubs, then it's ECILA Football, which is just Alice spelled backwards. And then every now and then I just have like third channels where I post a random video on, which is just like more Alice or Alice Talks More Football. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. And hopefully Tottenham won't embarrass themselves against United like, we have done in yesteryear. But yeah, cheers, guys. Like the video, subscribe, leave your comments of your predictions as well. Until next time, up the Spurs.